Shavua Tov, happy David Ben-Gurion Day, the day when we mark David Ben-Gurion's yahrzeit and remember the first prime minister of Israel who emphasized the importance of winning the war, but then also always, always dreaming and not delighting in the fight that we need to take upon ourselves. I'm Gil Troy. This is the Jewish People Policy Institute's latest panel. And today we're going to be speaking to Einat Wilf and our colleague Shmuel Rosner. But first, we have an interview between Yaakov Katz, our erstwhile colleague, and Danny Danon.
Member of Knesset Danny Danon, Israel's former ambassador to the United Nations, member of the Likud party. Thank you so much for joining Jewish People Policy Institute. I thought we'd start. You wrote a very interesting op-ed in the Wall Street Journal together with a member of the opposition, as a matter of fact, Ram Ben Barak, former deputy head of the Mossad. And you both had a very interesting proposal of what to do with the Palestinians. Why don't you share with us what the idea was?
Thank you for having me, Yaakov. Like you mentioned, together with MK Ram Ben Barak, we came with the idea of offering the Palestinians who want to live, and I make it very clearly, only those who choose to move out of Gaza, to show them that there is a possibility, there is a future for them in different countries. You know, when you look at the region, you see what happened in Syria. Millions of people fled Syria. 1.5 are in Jordan now, 3+ million are in Turkey, and the rest are in Europe and elsewhere all around the world. And I think we should start a discussion with the international community, with all the countries, including the Arab countries, by the way. They should be part of it. We should come in and start to think about the idea of opening the borders to a limited amount of Palestinians who wants to move out. Even if each country will take 5,000, 10,000 refugees from Gaza, it will make a huge difference. Still, there will be people in Gaza, but today to have 2 million people in a place, and you know Gaza very well, Yaakov, it wasn't a pleasant place before the war. Yeah. It will not be a pleasant place after the war. So I think it's a good idea. I know some of the people are not keen or eager to bring people from the Middle East to their countries, but I think when you explain to them that it's like a very small number, they're open to discuss it.
I'm curious, one thing that I've been thinking about also a lot, which kind of ties into what you both wrote, is that if we compare it, for example, to the Russia-Ukraine war, the moment that happened, all of Europe opened up its borders, allowed in millions of refugees from Ukraine. Not a single Arab country, not even one, has said we're willing to take the Palestinians from Gaza. How do you explain that? Forget about Europe, and I know you were writing about Europe, but let's talk about the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Qataris. I mean, there's endless number of countries. Why is no one offering to take them?
First of all, I want to clarify. We spoke about the entire world, not about the US or Europe, all the countries, the 190 countries in the world. Imagine that each one will take a few thousand, and then it's a major step. But I agree with you. Look, a few days ago, they had a reunion of the Arab League in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. All the Arab leaders flew in with fancy airplanes. That a massive event, and no one even thought about the idea of taking back a few thousand refugees to their countries. And by the way, many of those countries bring foreign workers to work there. So They can bring people from Gaza to work there, to give them a work permit, and to allow them to have a better future.
So Danny, you spent a lot of time in the United States, ambassador to the United Nations. The UN has been appalling throughout this whole process. But before we get to the UN, I do want to talk about the US. There's been a lot of pressure from President Biden on Israel for this, what they call the humanitarian pauses. He's held back from a ceasefire, but he would like to see longer than just a few hours a day. How do you understand the US position here? On the one hand, giving Israel a lot of weaponry, a lot of the supplies and munitions that it requires, sending the aircraft carriers and the Florida, the submarine. But on the other hand, a lot of diplomatic pressure.
In general, the Americans are very smart. They know to make the distinction between evil and good. And they realized from the beginning that we are fighting evil. Exactly like the US fought with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we are fighting now with Hamas. So they stood with us, and we appreciate that. But I think sometimes you have domestic politics, radical ideas, demonstrations. I think it's starting to affect, and I think that coming now with demands about a ceasefire, which is shameful. A ceasefire, it means that our soldiers will be in danger. It will allow Hamas to regroup, to get out, to take pictures of the forces, and the day after, unfortunately, we're going to have dozens of casualties. So I don't think we should accept any ceasefire. We should apply more pressure. We should fight to bring back the hostages, to eliminate Hamas. And you cannot eliminate a vicious enemy if you have a ceasefire every other day.
Yeah, my concern is that you agree to a few-day ceasefire, that immediately turns into more, and then there's pressure to continue it, and then how do you restart the operation? But let's talk about the United Nations, right? It's appalling. The Secretary General speaks about how this didn't happen in a vacuum, almost giving legitimacy to those horrific, barbaric attacks on October 7th. What is wrong with that place?
So, frankly speaking, Yaakov, the UN and the resolutions, I was not surprised. We know that the UN, it's part of the DNA to condemn Israel. But the Secretary General, I was shocked. I know Mr. Guterres very well. I hosted him at my house for Shabbat dinners. I brought him to Israel. He actually went with me to the southern community, to the kibbutzim, and he went with me into one of the tunnels of Hamas. Wow. And he was shocked. And all of a sudden to see, I don't know what happened to him. Sometimes I'm not sure if he's working for the UN or he's working for the Hamas, justifying the acts on October 7th and speaking every day about the children of Gaza. Why is not speaking about our children who are in Gaza today, those who were kidnapped from their homes? It is outrageous. I think not only Israel, but also the US should consider telling him that he can retract his word or he should resign. He should not be welcome in DC or in the Jewish communities around the world anymore. The way he's acting now, it's appalling.
It's terrible. I want to move sharp turn for a moment to politics, right? You're a member of Likud. The prime minister is your party chairman. Out of all the people within the government or within the decision-making apparatus, let's say, the IDF chief of staff, the head of military intelligence, the head of the Shabak, everybody has taken responsibility. The one person who refuses to do that so far, even the defense minister, your fellow party member, Yoav Gallant, the one person who refuses to do that is the prime minister. How do you explain that?
Well, I think for me, the most important thing that the prime minister will take responsibility for the war, for winning the war. But when I say winning, I mean defeating Hamas, not declaring a victory and Hamas will stay in different parts of Gaza. And let's be honest about it. We are now operating in a very small part of Gaza. I believe in the near future, we will move south to other areas, but that's not enough. We have to eradicate everything, demilitarize Gaza from north to south. And if we will not do that, that will be the most irresponsible act of his career. So what happened before, I think we should deal with that after we finish the war. But now the question is, if Prime Minister Netanyahu had the strength and the leadership skills to lead Israel for full victory, not a declaration, not a ceasefire, but full victory, which means that Hamas either they are dead or they are surrounded, nothing else.
And what about the day after, when the war is over? What's going to happen within Likud?
So first, frankly, I don't care about it. I think now we have to win the war. I'm worried about the idea that you will come up and you write everywhere and speak everywhere, Yaakov, and you will say Israel won the war because ABC. But then you will see Hamas supporters in Gaza saying we won the war. So with all the respect, I think it should be a clear victory that no one in the world can get, even not Al Jazeera or anyone else, come and say Hamas won the war, because there will be no Hamas. So it has to be a full victory, and then we can deal with the Likud, with the coalition, with the Knesset, with the government. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried that if we will not finish the job, enemies, not in Gaza, but in Lebanon, in Syria, Yemen, they will see weakness, and that's very dangerous for us.
Danny, I just have one last question for you. Back in 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, you were the Deputy Defense Minister. And at the time, you were critical of the operation, and you felt that we needed to do more. You've been kind of ringing that bell for years of how Israel was not tough enough, should have done more back 10 years ago. Do you feel that, a kind of wish that maybe more people had listened back then?
Absolutely. And, I'll be very honest with you. I think to myself, after the horrible scenes we all experienced, maybe I could have done more. Maybe I should have yelled louder. I criticized the government. I argued with the prime minister. He fired me for my position in the Ministry of Defense. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the U.S. pressured us, Secretary Kerry. We accepted a ceasefire, and we didn't go all the way. So I think it was a mistake. We're paying a heavy price because of that. And we should learn the lesson not only with Hamas in Gaza, but also with Hezbollah. If you have an enemy who is collecting capabilities, he will use it against us. That's what I told everybody in 2014. Unfortunately, only today we realize that.
At least now we finally woke up. Member MK Danny Danon from Likud, former ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Yaakov.
Thank you, Yaakov. Thank you, Danny. And welcome back. Einat, Shavua Tov. I want to go in two different directions. We've got to hope, right? If we don't keep to the pleasantries and at least enjoy the little moments where we're really in trouble. So first, I'm curious what you think about this master plan to spread Palestinians and perhaps Palestinian activism all over the world. I have to say, I'm not fully excited about it as someone who's seen a remarkable formula in demonstration after demonstration. It could be in Berkeley, it could be in London, it could be in Paris. Whoa, they follow the exact same hymnal. So I'm curious about that. But what's also interesting in the last part of the interview, Danny Danon talks about the fact that everybody's talking about how the government has to take responsibility, and that's also important. But no one's really talking about the need for American foreign policy experts to take responsibility, the need for previous administrations to take responsibility, the need for American Jews who pressured us to take responsibility. And as someone who's been back and forth, I'd be curious to see what you think of that as well.
So you kind of answered the first question very much in the vein that I would have had. I mean, I doubt that a lot of immigration officers and governments of European countries and Western countries are looking at the violent Palestinian demonstrations, at the kind of what they're doing to their country and thinking, we want more of that, please. I mean, can we have some more? So that, of course, is one aspect. The other is that at the end of the day, the problem is the ideology. The problem is not the people per se. There's no problem that 2 million Homo sapiens are living in the Gaza Strip. That's not a problem in itself. So there's no need to kind of have them go somewhere else. The problem is that those people, unlike 2 million people living in other places, believe that their noble duty, top priority, and life goal is to turn the Gaza Strip into a highly effective launch pad from which to liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. So what needs to be confronted and ultimately changed is this ideology. It has to be relegated to the margins of society. Western society, Arab society, Palestinian society, it has to become an illegitimate ideology, because the same 2 million people living in Gaza with a different ideology could have created a prosperous place. If they had different priorities, all the money, well, if they had different priorities, they wouldn't be in the mess to begin with, because they would have had a state existing from the 1930s, or at least from 1948. But if they had different priorities, all the money that has gone into Gaza, billions and billions and billions of dollars, it said that it's 4 times per capita the Marshall Plan. So all that money that went into Gaza, all the support, all the cement, all the plans for airports, and all of that actually existed. they would have used that to make Gaza a remarkable, prosperous place. So the problem is what they believe, not that they actually exist as a people. And that's what needs to change. And sorry.
Go.
Your second question was on, remind me?
On the and I think they're connected. On the failure of
yeah.
American foreign policy analysts to take some responsibility, to say they also had their own conceptia, and to just kind of deepen it. It's Ben-Dror Yemini wrote that very important book, The Industry of Lies, but it goes deeper. Like the Palestinians have pulled this con on the world where they've been able to get liberals to absorb and support this particular ideology, an ideology which is anti-feminist, an ideology that is anti-gay, an ideology that is illiberal to the extreme. And so the problem is when you're trying to have ideological warfare, and nevertheless the people who kind of set much of the ideological tone aren't willing to engage, you've got one problem, and then you see the foreign policy analysts who are sort of drinking from the same poison as well. You're not. And then we'll welcome Shmuel.
Yeah, I mean that'll be the day when American foreign policy, when the whole peace industry will recognize, because what I love about the various peace industry participants, each one of them will always report that they were this close to getting a deal. They were all somehow really, really close to getting a deal. And almost none of them will ever acknowledge that a deal was nowhere to be gotten because the ideology was foundationally opposed to a Jewish state remaining anywhere at the end of the deal. So that'll be the day when that's actually acknowledged. But you're right that the bigger issue is that people have to have the resolve, the clarity of mind, the moral conscience, the confidence to engage in ideological warfare. In many ways, it's much harder than, okay, let's just divide the land and make some security arrangements and do this and that on the settlements. Those are actually easy. But when you're saying we need to defeat an entire ideology, that requires a character that seems to have been missing from America since, I don't know, the 1940s. I don't know. So we need that.
Welcome, Shmuel. Good to see you in Shavua Tov.
It's a pleasure, and I apologize for being late.
It's all good. We should tell everybody that Israel is enduring intense rains, and a number of us got stuck in massive traffic jams today, including myself. So we feel your pain, and the important thing is that you got home safely. One of the things that Ambassador Daron was talking about was this whole question of ceasefire, and how, from his perspective, how dangerous it is to have a ceasefire, because basically a ceasefire is going to allow Hamas a chance to just regroup. From your polling of Israelis and your sense of where the Israeli conversation is going, where do Israelis stand on this question, A, of ceasefire, and B, the ceasefire is always linked with release of hostages? What's the conversation with the man on the street and the woman on the street today in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in the north and the south?
Well, first of all, we must say that the ceasefire will be a decision of the political leadership and IDF commanders. This is not a polling question, and I don't think the public is going to be the one deciding whether there's a ceasefire or not. But the question is a good question in the sense that in many ways, Israelis, on the one hand, really long for the moment in which many hostages will be released from Gaza and will come back to Israel. And if you see a short ceasefire linked to a scene in which dozens of men, women, and children go back to their families, this could make this could sweeten a bitter pill, because what Israelis really want, and they're insistent and they're persistent in demanding such result, what they really want is victory in this war. They are tired of these rounds of violence or rounds of fire exchanges, such as the ones we had 2 years ago and 5 years ago and 8 years ago. It is clear that this round must be different in the sense that the enemy will understand that it hugely miscalculated when it attacked Israel in such fashion. So wanting the release of the hostages is one thing. Wanting to have victory is another thing. The ceasefire is somewhere in between. You accept it in order to have the hostages back. You reject it, or you're reluctant to accept it because you are afraid that this will harm or somewhat diminish Israel's ability to have clear victory. And the leadership will have to take these two things into account as it decides on the number of hostages versus the number of hours or days that they agree to have to hold their fire.
So underlying the question with Danny Danon's piece in the Wall Street Journal is the day after, right? I'm not talking about the political day after. I'm talking about what happens with the Palestinians. And the really question is, what's the war aim? So we have general agreement, I think, throughout the society. And what you were saying, Shmuel, is that we want to degrade Hamas. We don't want Hamas to be a threat anymore. But beyond that, I think the real question is, what does the day after look like in terms of the 2 million Palestinians? The denazification process that you're talking about, Einat, will take a very, very long time. If I gave you the power to articulate a war aim beyond degrading Hamas, what would it be? We'll start with Einat, and then we'll go to Shmuel.
The 4 war aims that I think need to be clearly articulated, and I'll add that I think we need to have the war cabinet wake up every morning, go to the media abroad, and say clearly, war is hell. We don't want this war. We want the war to end. This is what will bring the war to an end. Release all the hostages, all of them unconditionally. Disarm Hamas, destroy the tunnels in Gaza. Bring the planners and perpetrators of the October 7th massacre to justice, and publicly commit to letting go of the from the river to the sea ideology. Because I think what happens is that people view the war as a response to the massacre of October 7th. But ultimately, the legitimacy of wars is not based on what they are a response to, but rather what they are trying to achieve. So if we look at Pearl Harbor to the Japanese defeat, the brilliance was that of the Allies is that they made it very clear what they expect Japan to become after surrender. It wasn't just about surrender. It wasn't just about disarming the Japanese military. It was about a whole vision for what kind of Japan, what kind of state it will be. It wasn't just about, we are waging this war because we can't allow a Pearl Harbor to happen once again. At one point, that loses its power. The power comes from the vision to the future, not what happened as the trigger. So I think this should clearly be the war aims. They should be defined as, therefore, the conditions that end the war tomorrow. I think every war cabinet member should declare that fulfilling these conditions will end the war tomorrow. Every call for a ceasefire should be answered with, these are the 4 conditions. As soon as they're fulfilled, the war ends. And just repeat, repeat, repeat. Because otherwise we get stuck in like little discussions and what to do this and what to do here. And we fail to articulate a clear vision for what ends the war and what comes after the war. And this is also the claim that the day after must begin today. It's not we end the war and then there's the day after. The day after begins now. If we give fuel, if we give aid without saying that this fuel will continue to fuel the war machine, if it is not guaranteed that it goes to people who have let go of from the river to the sea ideology, then we're losing. We're getting stuck. We need to condition everything, every step, every moment on the attainment of these war aims. And to be very clear on that, I think this is both the right thing to do in practice and also the smart thing to do in terms of our messaging to the world. We need to be clear on what we're trying to achieve and what our vision is and what we're fighting for.
When we talk about the fog of war, we often talk about the confusion of the battlefield. But what you're challenging us to make sure is that we can't go into war without the foggiest notion of what we're looking for and what we're trying to achieve. And we have a different fog of war if you just can't have a lack of clarity. Shmuel, how would you articulate the vision?
Well, it's not. I'm not going to disagree with Einat. I'm going to slightly move sideways in trying to articulate some of the things that aren't part. What Einat is basically saying, our strategy or our goal is to have a peaceful Gaza alongside Israel, with which we all agree. But this is the type of thing that some people might call, motherhood and apple pie. Of course, we want Gaza to be peaceful, and that's our condition. Then again, we will have to deal with some of the nuances that are could become annoyance, but they're part of the back and forth that Israel must have with both the Palestinians and the United States and the international community as we look at the way forward. A lot of it will focus on the question of whether it is or it isn't the Palestinian Authority that comes in as the governing body that controls Gaza. I think there is a compromise here that we can achieve. President Biden wrote an article at the Washington Post this morning, basically declaring that this is the goal of the United States, to have the Palestinian Authority governing Gaza. If you were listening carefully to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said a few days ago at his, or maybe it was yesterday at the press conference, he did not rule it out. He said he would not accept the Palestinian Authority in its current state as the ruler of Gaza. Namely, maybe if we can somehow change the Palestinian Authority, it can become the body that Israel can accept as the ruler of Gaza, with the condition that Israel will retain its ability to operate militarily within the Gaza Strip for the foreseeable future. And when I say foreseeable future, I'm not talking about weeks or months. I'm talking about many years. It will be a long-term arrangement in which Israel must retain its ability to go into Gaza and make sure that the region is truly disarmed, and that Gaza cannot regain its position as a place in which bunkers are dug and tunnels and rockets are stored in waiting for the next round of violence against Israel. Now, look, what we want, all the conditions that Einat laid out are agreeable to me. However, it will be very difficult to tell the Palestinians that we will have a perpetuation of the war unless they get rid of a certain ideology. I'm not even sure how does one know that the other side truly got rid of one's ideology. Some people will no doubt still have this ideology, and we also can say that some Israelis have an ideology that is similar, a river to the sea type of ideology. It's impossible for us to demand that all Palestinians abandon their dreams about having a river to the sea type of place. You disagree with me or not, and that's fine. I think that at the current moment, Israelis care much more about capabilities than about intentions. To tell you the truth, I don't trust the intentions of the Palestinians. And even if they come forward tomorrow telling me we no longer wish to annihilate Israel, we no longer wish to have a greater Palestinian state, we are truly willing to live alongside Israel and to have a Zionist Israeli state and a Palestinian state and to live peacefully forever after. I still want to make sure they don't have the rockets. And I think one of the lessons that we learned from October 7th is to focus more on the abilities and the capabilities of our enemies than their intentions. Intentions can be changed when someone has the weapons with which to harm me. That's something that is much more tangible and much more preventable, at least the way I see it. But let Anait disagree with me.
I'm going to let Anait disagree.
She'll be much more convincing. She's a much more convincing speaker.
What's so interesting is that this definitely ties into Ben-Gurion Day, because one of his famous quotations from the 1955 Yom Ha'atzmaut speech was, "Our future depends not on what the Gentiles will say, but what the Jews will do." And so the question is what not what they're going to say, but what they're going to do. Einat, please respond.
So I would argue that it's the opposite. Intentions and ideas are the only thing that matters because they also create capabilities. America is very powerful, and yet we're not scared because by and large, we assume that it's our friend. We have been willing, as part of the Abraham Accords, to accept that these nations will arm themselves with the most advanced weapons. We support Egypt being armed. We actually have our own, AIPAC works to ensure that Egypt gets the support it gets from America, because we're not concerned about these capabilities because we have an assumption regarding their intentions, who they are, what they believe in. I do think we need to be a little more suspicious of the Egyptians, but that's but that's how it works. And the reason that Gaza has those capabilities to begin with is because it had that ideology. And that's what I've been saying over the years. Every dollar, every cement, currently, every liter of fuel that goes into Gaza, given that their ideology remains to liberate Palestine and no Jewish state, it's guaranteed that they will build the capabilities to attack us. So I agree, we need more military control to ensure that those capabilities don't develop. But in parallel, we need to ensure that the ideology changes. The reason we're in the mess we're in, one of the reasons, is that we as Israelis for decades have done nothing to highlight the fact that this is the ideology, that it needs to be confronted. We closed our eyes to the Western indulgence of this ideology. And I think this is what has to change. And you're saying, how can we know that an ideology is over? It's actually remarkably easy because it's not about polling, it's about public expressions. When an ideology moves to a certain margin of society, it is expressed much less. The people who express it are considered crazy. You see it. The Germans who want to still take back Western Poland, there's a few of them still in existence, but they're considered nuts. I've been in a conference where one of them spoke up and everyone looked at him and hissed. So this is how you know that a certain ideology in a society has moved to the margins. Right now, unlike Israel, where you have really lots of ideas, you do not have public voices among Palestinians saying clearly that this ideology has brought them nothing but ruin, and it's time to move on. When we begin to see more and more of these people writing op-eds, even now when Palestinians say, oh, Hamas is terrible, I keep looking through all these WhatsApps. People are like, I got this from my Palestinian friend, and look, but they're not saying anything that says, time to let go of this ideology. It brought us nothing but ruin. So it's actually quite easy to know when a people change ideology because it gets expressed in multiple ways. And I think we just didn't do anything really to try to change anything for decades.
I think I don't think we really disagree. The only thing we disagree, or we might disagree on, is whether you can make such argument as a condition, a precondition to ending the current war. The only thing I don't think the process of Palestinians truly changing the ideology, that's a long-term process. I hope war can end before that. And if and until they change their ideology, a state of war will remain, or a state of Israel having to make sure no war or no war aims can be achievable for the other side. I would not put it as one of the 4 demands that I put forward as precondition for ending the current war. That's all. That's the only article on which we might have a debate.
Thank you, Einat. Thank you, Shmuel. This is Gil Troy from the Jewish People Policy Institute. And we have to finish with one more Ben Gurion quote. He had a lot of great ones, but he said, in Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. And I think today, day after day, first of all, our heroic soldiers are making miracles. The people of Israel are making miracles. The Jewish people are making miracles, but we need a couple more. Thank you very much, and Laila Tov.
Thank you.